The Giants begin making roster cuts to get under the cap. That plus a couple of crazy thoughts, including a potential trade scenario for running back Saquon Barkley, coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina, and thank you so much for tuning in, making the Locked On Giants podcast your first listen of the day, or if you're watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. Really appreciate all the feedback we've been receiving here on the show. And for today's show, I'm going to get you caught up on some of the roster moves that have taken place so far. A couple roster moves made on Wednesday to start getting the Giants under the salary cap, and I'm sure there's going to be questions regarding the cap. We're also going to talk about some funky scenarios, some scenarios that, I was talking to a couple of people about different things the Giants might do, and these are just, to me, they're kind of outrageous, but I'm going to mention them on the show in segment 2 and kind of see what some of you think. I'm sure some of you will weigh in, which you're welcome to do, of course, via email, via, our text message service, or if you're watching on YouTube, by responding in the comments section. So that's certainly something you can do. And then finally, we're going to close out with a proposed scenario for Saquon Barkley. So that is our lineup on this Thursday edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, happy to have you with us. And before we jump into everything, just real quick, looking ahead next week, I'm going to try and get some guests on to talk about the combine, the workouts of which are scheduled to start on Thursday. They're scheduled to start today, and they're going to run through the weekend. So we'll get some people in who actually saw the workouts. We'll do Twitter Tuesday next week, and then we'll just keep on rolling as the Giants continue to make cuts. And I'm sure there are more cuts coming on the roster. So all that and more is coming up on the Locked On Giants podcast. All right, let's get you caught up on the roster moves. Now, on Tuesday, General Manager Joe Schoen spoke about how roster moves would be coming, the Giants needing to get under the salary cap. And the Giants, if I'm not mistaken, they were something like $12 million under, I believe it was like something $12 million before they made the moves. That's total. And then it was something like 24, if I'm not mistaken, in effective cap space. And effective cap space is what the team needs to be at in order to comply with the top 51 rule that begins on March 16th, which is the start of the new league year. All right, so since I know this question is going to come up, I'm going to answer it. And a lot of you are probably wondering, okay, where did the Giants stand with cap space? And, look, just an FYI, folks, cap space is going to be fluid over the next several weeks. So I'll give you a figure today, but that doesn't mean that figure, by the time you hear this podcast, is going to be accurate. So that's the disclaimer. But as far as cap space goes, the Giants still remain in the red. They are $19.048 million in the red for effective cap space. That means they've got to trim another $19 million just to break even to qualify, or actually comply with the top 51. They have $6.497 million total cap space. So that is if they had just a 53-man roster. All right, so still a lot of work to be done. The Giants on Wednesday did make 2 cuts, one of which I expected. I outlined it in my salary cap plan. The other of which I was kind of on the fence with. I was 50-50, and I leaned towards not cutting him. I think, more towards reducing his salary. But the cuts that were made were tight end Kyle Rudolph and Devonta Booker, running back. All right. Now, Rudolph, I fully expected. There was just no way they were going to carry him forward, especially after, the season he had last year and how he kind of looked shot, to be honest with you. All right. Devonta Booker. Now, that was the guy that I thought maybe the Giants would keep. Would they maybe lower his number? Perhaps. But you know what? Working against him is the fact that you've got Saquon Barkley in front of you right now, regardless of, what happens with Barkley. And we'll talk about the trade scenario coming up later in the program. But you've got Saquon Barkley in front of you, counting for $7.2 million plus guaranteed money. Booker, was going to count for $3.125 million. So with that transaction, the Giants saved $2.125 million off their cap. So you have that one. You have the $5 million that the Giants saved in cutting Kyle Rudolph. So they have saved $7.125 million off their cap, which, again, they're still in the red, but they're getting a little closer. They're chipping away at that. And there's still plenty more moves that they can do. And over on Giants Country, I posted a updated salary cap plan. Basically, what I did was I restructured James Bradberry because I've kind of heard mixed thoughts about James Bradberry. I still think he's going to be cut, but a few people have told me that he might stick around this year, but at a lower number. So I accommodated for that and was able to shave his number down. And I also added in a few cuts that I hadn't accounted for in my previous plan. And they included Nick Gates. They included, Nick Gates, Caden Smith, Darius Slayton, and so Nick Gates, Caden Smith, Darius Slayton. Now, I didn't include O'Shane Ximines. I think he's going to be in there as well. That's really not going to move the needle that much, but, look, it's every little bit counts, I guess. But in revising my plan, I came up with $44.12 million in savings, which is still, right about where I think Shane wants to be. That'll give him about $31.9 million to work with. Overall, and about 19.3 in effective cap space. So still a lot of work to be done. Again, the Booker decision, again, I was 50-50 on that. The Rudolph decision, that was a no-brainer. Some of these new decisions that I put into this article on Giants Country, which I will include in the show notes, by the way, they're more procedural type moves. In addition to moves that I already had, such as Sterling Shepard, Blake Martinez, I had him as a restructure, Riley Dixon as a cut, Leonard Williams I had as a restructure, and Kenny Golladay I had as a restructure. And look, I know some people have said to me, well, Pat, Joe Shane said that he doesn't want to really have to kick the can down the road. And I get that, folks. But when I restructured these contracts, I made sure to keep it in such a way that there's not a lot of money kicked down the road. So I tried to balance it out. And I will post a link to that article in the show notes if you want to check it out. Because it's just, I've got a spreadsheet there that you could see exactly what my math looks like. And again, you can comment on it if you want. And, if it doesn't make sense, feel free to ask me about it. And I'll be happy to answer that. So, all right, folks, we still have more coming up on today's Locked On Giants podcast, including some offbeat suggestions I have for the roster, which I'll tell you about in just a bit. But first, I got to tell you about BetOnline, our friends over at betonline.net. They are the number one spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline.net is also the best spot for your sports scores, podcasts, and news, whether it's basketball, hockey, boxing, and UFC, or your favorite Vegas games. Head on over to their website today on your mobile device or your desktop to learn more about the trends and all the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, folks, so in this segment, I'm going to talk about a couple of crazy ideas. And I'm I am giving you permission, not that you need my permission, to say that they're crazy if you don't agree with them. But basically, let me give you a little background before I get into them. I was talking with some people about different scenarios that the Giants are facing and what they might do in certain scenarios. One on defense, one on offense. And we came up with some counter arguments to some popular beliefs that exist in the media and amongst the fan base. And some of these ideas may sound crazy. You might hear them and say, no way, Pat, it's not happening. You might turn off the podcast for that matter and say, look, I don't want to hear anymore. But look, I thought they were kind of interesting and I wanted to share them with you. Want to hear what you think. So if nothing else, this should generate some discussion amongst everybody because, hey, that's what this podcast is all about. Not just me sitting here yammering all day long, but also hearing from you guys and gals, getting your feedback on what's discussed. So I mentioned there were a couple of ideas on personnel decisions that the Giants are going to have to make. And the first one involves tight end Evan Engram. Now, Evan Engram, as we all know, is going to be an unrestricted free agent. And the feeling is the Giants will move on from him for a number of reasons. Number one, the injury history, all right? Engram, every year, with the exception of one, has missed games due to injuries. The dropsies issue. Engram has had a problem with ball security and dropping passes, especially in big cases or big time scenarios. Number three, Engram is a receiver really in a tight end's body. All right. So he's not a guy you're going to ask to block. All right. He's a willing blocker, but he's not good at it. So he's kind of one dimensional. All right. He's got this tantalizing speed and downfield ability, but it just hasn't been brought out. All right, so really no reason to re-sign Evan Engram, right? Especially if you consider that Brian Daboll up in Buffalo ran mostly 11 personnel, all right? And tight ends weren't as big of a factor in the passing game up there as the receivers were. So all the signs would seem to point to Evan Engram leaving. And I think he will. But there is a potential scenario where Engram doesn't leave. And here it is. The Mike Kafka effect. Now, let's talk about the offense that Mike Kafka came from, that being the Kansas City Chiefs. And let's talk about the tight end that the Chiefs have and how he's been deployed. Now, before I go for any further, I am in no way, shape, or form comparing Evan Engram to Travis Kelce. One is a Pro Bowler. The other one is just a former first-round pick who is a good guy, a hard worker, but just hasn't made good. I'm talking about how they are deployed in their respective offenses. All right. Travis Kelce, not a blocker. All right. You're not going to see him do much in the way of active blocking. What you are going to see Travis Kelce do, and this is where you might be able to make a case, albeit a slim case, but a case nonetheless, to bring back Evan Engram, is you will see Kelce line up as the big slot guy. All right, now why do I mention that? Because if you look at the trends in the NFL, what happens? The slot cornerback has become a very important position. And a lot of times teams will put a smaller slot cornerback on the assumption that they're going to face a smaller receiver. Well, you go and you put a big tight end in there, and guess what, folks? Now you have a mismatch. So it's just kind of interesting. This is something that the Chiefs have done under Andy Reid. And you wonder if this is something that Kafka is going to bring with him from Kansas City and suggest be incorporated in the Giants offense. And if not for Evan Engram, maybe for the next tight end they draft. But anyway, if you were talking about keeping a guy who is a good locker room presence, who works hard, who maybe can even mentor a young tight end, Evan Engram is your guy. Now, Again, people are going to say to me, no, 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 get him out of here. He can't get out of here fast enough. I do not think Evan Ingram will be back. Certainly not, on a cheap deal. I think his agent's going to probably want to get him a decent deal because he is still young. He does have talent, and he might flourish better, quite honestly, on a fast track, like down in New Orleans, for example, or out in Arizona or something like that. But that's a case that could be made to bring Evan Ingram back. And I don't think it happens, but had to throw that out there. So I'm curious to see what you guys and gals think about that. Now, there's one other case, this one on the defense, that I want to talk about. And that is if the Giants move on from James Bradberry. And that scenario, quite honestly, I think is 50-50. I mean, they've got to do something about his cap number. We can all agree on that. But will they cut him? Possibly. I mean, I think if I'm the Giants, I try and get something for him in a trade. Again, maybe I call up Kansas City and see if maybe I can swing something for Bradberry. Kansas City, let me just check. They have all right. The Chiefs don't have the cap money right now to fit James Bradberry in, but they can always, if the Giants are desperate enough to get rid of him, they could always take on part of the salary, I think it's 12.9 million that Bradberry is due to earn, and split the difference with the Chiefs. That's a salary cap method that a lot of people don't know about, but that can be done. All right, so if the Giants do move on from James Bradberry, be it a cut or a trade, what do they do at that opposite cornerback spot across from Adoree Jackson? All right. Obviously, the top answer is you bring in a draft pick. But here's the thing, folks. If the Giants have one of the two top offensive linemen on the board and one of the top pass rushers on the board at 5 and 7, does it make sense for them to pass on an offensive tackle and a pass rusher in favor of a cornerback? I'm not so sure it does. All right. So if you're the Giants now and you have access to one of those top offensive tackles, and then 2 picks later, one of your top defensive edge rushers is on the board, you're going to not take a cornerback until at the earliest day 2. Possibly in the second round, maybe even the third round, depending on, who's on the board at what point. So now you've got to ask yourself, okay, if I take a day 2 draft pick at cornerback, is he going to be better than James Bradberry? And if the answer is yes, then you grab him. But if you find that the value is not there, what do you do at that vacant cornerback spot? Well, here's a thought. And again, I know it's going to be crazy, but what about Aaron Robinson? Now look, here's the thing, folks. Aaron Robinson, when he played at UCF, was primarily a slot cornerback. I get that. He didn't have a whole lot of experience playing on the outside. Comes to the Giants, he has injury issues, so we see a small sample size, but one that was very encouraging looking. So let's ask ourselves, could Aaron Robinson potentially play outside cornerback, replacing James Bradberry, who, by the way, has a voidable year in his contract for 2023. It's not as crazy as it sounds. Now, would the Giants go that route? Probably not, because again, Aaron Robinson, not a big enough sample size. Maybe you go with a veteran if you move on from Bradberry. Maybe you just keep Bradberry for the year and then say goodbye to him after this year. And again, he's got the voidable year in his contract. So he is not going to, I think he's going to count for something like 1.33 million in dead money in 2023. But Aaron Robinson, that's the guy I think we have to wonder about and where he fits in. You also have Darnay Holmes. Darnay Holmes is more of your slot guy, I think. But can Aaron Robinson, who has that good size and that speed, play on the outside? And I think that's something the coaches are going to want to find out, to be honest with you. Could make for some intrigue this year on the defense. All right, Giant fans. So those are my two wackadoodle ideas. I, again, want to hear what you think about both of them. And coming up, we're going to talk about Saquon Barkley and what it might take for a team to lure him away. All right, Giant fans, you've got Patricia Traina here on the Locked On Giants podcast on Thursday. And as you're listening to this show, depending on what time you're listening to this show, the NFL Combine workouts start today. So I believe the quarterbacks are up first. They're going to work out, and then obviously the running backs, the receivers, the tight ends, all, the rest of the positions will follow suit, and that will continue through to the weekend. And we'll try and have a wrap-up show for you at some point next week, in addition to Twitter Tuesday, of course. And I am working on getting a guest for you, a Giants player, current Giants player guest. So fingers crossed that comes together, because this will be a good interview if I get who I'm targeting. See, I'm always full of surprises for you guys and gals, right? So anyway, let's talk Saquon Barkley. All right. Now, Joe Schoen made headlines when he discussed the possibility of Saquon Barkley being on the trading block. So that got me thinking, what might it take for a team to swing a deal with the Giants to get Saquon Barkley, if they are indeed serious about moving him? Which, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, I question whether they really are serious about moving him. And I say that because if they really wanted to move him, why would they be building in specific plays and parts of their playbook that include him? Because talents like his, they're kind of unique. So why would you waste time doing that if you weren't planning on having him? Well, let's talk about what it might take for somebody to get Barkley. All right, so I'm going to use the Leonard Williams contract and trade from a few years ago as an example. Now, when the Giants traded for Leonard Williams, and yes, I know, folks, that's still a sore spot with some of you. I get it. But when they traded with the Jets, Leonard Williams was in the option year of his rookie deal. I don't remember what he made at the time, but what I do remember was that as part of the trade, the Giants had to give the Jets a third-round pick and a conditional fifth that would have turned into a fourth had the Giants signed Leonard Williams to a long-term deal after that first half season that Williams was a Giant, which didn't happen, by the way. So the pick remained a fifth-round pick. But here's the other thing that I think a lot of people forget about, and I think could factor in to a Saquon Barkley deal. The Jets agreed to pay most of Leonard Williams's remaining salary on his contract. So basically what you had was a split where the Giants, who I think might have been cap strapped at the time when they made that acquisition, they paid part of it, but the Jets paid the bulk of it. All right, so now if you are the Giants and you get an offer from a team, let's say, because we know we're not going to get a first-round pick offer, we probably will not get a second-round pick offer, and I question whether we would get a third-round pick offer for Saquon Barkley, given that he is coming off the injuries, the ankle, obviously, and still working his way back from the ACL. So what could the Giants realistically get? All right. How about a fifth-round pick that becomes a conditional fourth if certain criteria is met? And how about the Giants saying to the acquiring team, look, we will split the difference in Barkley's salary. Okay, so in other words, folks, Barkley is due a guaranteed $7.2 million. So what's to say that the Giants, in any negotiations they have and a potential trade partner, say, you know what, you pay half, we'll pay half. Now, it's not getting the entire salary off the books. I get that. But it's getting half of it off the books. And half is better than none. All right? So the Giants could potentially clear salary cap space if they make such a, if such a term is included in any offer. I could see a team going for that, to be honest with you. If they could get Saquon Barkley at a low rate like that, half of 7.2 million, why not? Especially if the guy shows that he's healthy and his past issues with the ACL are indeed behind them. Now, again, I do not think the Giants will trade him. I think that's all wishful thinking on some people's part. I think that's all hearsay, but you'd never know. And the fact that Joe Shane opened that door is why we're talking about it. There was a time when I would have said there's no way in heck the Giants will trade Saquon Barkley. Now, I'm not so sure. So we'll see. And I'll tell you what could potentially give us a clue as to whether or not the Giants might really entertain offers from Saquon. And that is what they end up doing for the rest of their salary cap cuts. So in other words, if they can get to the $40 million that Shane is looking to get to without having to trade Barkley, chances are he's going to stay. If they fall short and they have to make more moves, maybe they look to move him. I don't know. Maybe I'm not going to say they're going to extend him. They certainly can't touch that money because he does. That money is guaranteed. He does need to get the 7.2 million, but that's going to be a very interesting scenario to see how that plays out. And again, I don't see the Giants getting anything really higher right now than maybe a conditional fifth that can turn into a fourth if Barkley plays a certain percentage of the snaps for his new team. So bottom line, folks, I think Barkley is going to be a Giant in 2022. Yes, a case can be made to move him. I don't see it happening, though. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us on the Locked On Giants podcast. Hope you enjoyed the program as always. Be sure to tune in tomorrow as we continue coverage on the 2022 NFL Scouting Combine. Hopefully we'll have some results, some more scuttlebutt to talk about, and we'll get you caught up on everything. So until then, everybody, have a great one, and thanks for making the Locked On Giants podcast your first listen of the day, or if on YouTube, your first watch of the day. Have a great one.